I am sorry, but I can't stop. Those are the words you were never supposed to hear, not because they were cruel, not because they were meant to hurt you, but because somewhere behind those words was a truth that had been struggling to escape for longer than you realize, and once you understand what they really meant, you may never look at this person, or yourself, the same way again. There are moments when someone says something simple, yet something inside you immediately knows that the sentence carries a hidden meaning. This is one of those moments. You may have heard those words before, I am sorry, but I can't stop. Maybe they were spoken quietly, maybe they were whispered through a message. Maybe they were never spoken directly to you at all, maybe you simply felt them, and somehow, without knowing why, you knew they were connected to you, because there are connections that do not disappear just because people stop talking. There are bonds that remain alive in silence. There are feelings that hide behind distance. And there are people who walk away physically while something inside them continues walking back toward you. You may have thought the story was finished. You may have convinced yourself that the silence meant the answer was no. You may have told yourself that if someone truly cared, they would have stayed, spoken, explained, and fought for what existed between you. But what if you were only seeing the surface? What if the silence was not the ending? What if the distance was not rejection? What if something was happening behind the scenes that you were never meant to see until you were strong enough to understand it? Because sometimes life removes something from your hands before revealing why it was never truly lost. And right now, there is a strange feeling surrounding your heart. You may not be able to explain it. You may wake up thinking about something you have not thought about in weeks. You may suddenly remember a voice, a place, a conversation, a look, or a moment that seemed meaningless at the time. You may notice certain words appearing everywhere. A song, a name, a number, a familiar place, a sentence in a random conversation. Something that seems ordinary to everyone else somehow feels unusually personal to you, and you keep asking yourself why. Why now? Why this person? Why this feeling? Why does your heart still react when your mind keeps telling you to move forward? Perhaps because there are some chapters that do not close when the door shuts. They close when the truth finally enters the room, and the truth is beginning to move toward you. You have spent enough time wondering whether you were forgotten. You have wondered whether you mattered. You have wondered whether someone else replaced you. You have wondered whether the moments you shared were real or whether your heart simply gave meaning to something that was never meant to last. But there was something you could not see. Something happened after the distance began. Something changed inside the person you thought had moved on. At first, they tried to ignore it. They tried to continue normally. They told themselves that life would become easier if they stopped looking backward. They kept themselves busy. They surrounded themselves with people. They laughed. They talked. They went places. They acted as though everything was fine. But there was one thing they could not escape: you. Not necessarily your physical presence, not your messages, not your photographs, not even your name. They could escape all of those things. What they could not escape was the feeling that appeared whenever they were alone. That quiet moment when there was no one around to distract them, that moment before sleep, that moment after waking, That moment when a familiar song played unexpectedly. That moment when they saw someone who reminded them of you. That moment when something beautiful happened and their first instinct was to tell you, and then they remembered that they couldn't. That was when the truth began to hurt. Because you were not simply a person they had known, you had become a question they could not answer. Why couldn't they stop thinking about you? Why couldn't they stop remembering? Why couldn't they stop wondering what would have happened if they had made a different choice? Why couldn't they stop imagining another conversation? And eventually, one question became louder than all the others. What if I was wrong? That question changed everything, because regret rarely arrives dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it appears while someone is driving home alone. Sometimes it arrives while staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning. Sometimes it arrives when a person realizes that the person they once took for granted is no longer standing where they left them, and that realization can be terrifying, because you have changed. While they were trying to understand their feelings, you were becoming someone different. You were learning how to live without the answers. You were learning how to stop chasing explanations. You were learning how to carry disappointment without allowing it to destroy your hope. You were learning that love does not mean abandoning yourself, and somewhere along the way, you became quieter, stronger, more aware. You stopped begging life to return what had left. You started asking life to reveal what was meant for you. That was the turning point. Because when you stop chasing what you cannot control, you create space for what has been searching for you, and something began moving, slowly, almost invisibly. A conversation happened. Someone asked a question. A name was mentioned. A memory resurfaced. A person who had been silent suddenly became curious. Someone noticed a change. Someone said something they had been holding inside. And suddenly, the story you thought was over began opening another door. But there was a reason they had not returned sooner. And this is where the story becomes more complicated than you expected. They were afraid. Not necessarily afraid of you. They were afraid of what being near you made them feel. Because you touched a part of them that they had spent years protecting. Around other people, they could remain comfortable. They could remain guarded. They could keep everything controlled. But around you, something slipped. They felt seen. And being seen can be more frightening than being loved. Because when someone truly sees you, you can no longer hide behind your excuses. You can no longer pretend you do not care. You can no longer convince yourself that your choices have no consequences. And they knew that. That is why they pulled away, not because nothing was there, but because too much was there. You may have interpreted their distance as proof that you were not enough. But what if their distance was evidence of something happening inside them? What if they were fighting themselves? What if every step away from you required them to silence a part of their heart? And what if that part never became silent? That is why the words matter. I am sorry, but I can't stop. I can't stop thinking. I can't stop remembering. I can't stop feeling. I can't stop wondering. I can't stop looking for signs. I can't stop asking whether I made the wrong decision. I can't stop, and perhaps the most unexpected part is that they are not the only one who has been changing. You have been changing too. There was a version of you who needed an answer immediately. There was a version of you who wanted to know what someone else was thinking every second. There was a version of you who believed that if you loved someone deeply enough, they would automatically understand the value of your heart. But now you know better. Love can be real and still require patience. Connection can be powerful and still require boundaries. Hope can survive without becoming desperation. And sometimes the greatest transformation happens when you finally stop asking someone else to confirm your worth. You are beginning to understand that your worth was never waiting inside another person's decision. You were valuable before they noticed you. You were worthy before they returned. You were complete before they understood what they had lost, and strangely enough, that realization may be exactly what changes what happens next, because when someone realizes you are no longer waiting in the same way, something inside them becomes unsettled. They begin wondering whether the door they once walked away from is still open. They begin wondering whether you still feel the same. They begin wondering whether someone else has entered your life. They begin wondering whether they waited too long, and those questions can become impossible to silence. There may come a moment when they almost contact you. They type something, delete it, type again, delete it again. They stare at your name. They put the phone down. They pick it up. They tell themselves it is better to leave things alone. Then something reminds them of you, and suddenly their heart wins another small battle against their pride. But there is something you don't know. Someone else may already know about this. Someone may have noticed their behavior. Someone may have asked them why they keep bringing you up. Someone may have seen the expression on their face when your name appeared, and when they were asked directly, they may have tried to deny everything. But denial can only hide the truth for so long, because eventually someone says the one sentence that breaks through the wall. You still care, don't you? And there is silence, not an ordinary silence, the kind of silence that answers the question before the person ever speaks, and perhaps that is when they finally admit what they have been afraid to say. I am sorry, but I can't stop. I can't stop caring. I can't stop wondering.